forged from World Trade Tower steel, transformed into a high-tech masterpiece of warfare, designed to defend her country and confront the kinds of threats that helped create her. Her completion is a race against time and the elements, as yet another national tragedy threatens to stop her construction completely. But can this 21st century marvel of engineering live up to the valor of her famous predecessor? Can her crew overcome the challenges of technology and evolving warfare before yet another tragedy strikes? She is not just any ship. She is the USS New York. On September 11th, 2001, the world that we knew changed. So too did our efforts to protect ourselves. While many struggled with the devastation and loss, few could imagine that the rubble of twisted steel would help form the beginnings of our new defense. But in the months that passed, an idea began to emerge that would turn rubble into action.
Governor Pataki, after 9/11, he went to the Navy and said, we want to have a ship named the USS New York.
But what ship? According to Navy convention, only submarines are named after states. To honor the victims of September 11th, Governor Pataki requests the Navy make special consideration and bestow the name of USS New York on a surface warship involved in the War on Terror. This is the Northrop Grumman Avondale Shipyard, 20 miles upriver from New Orleans. On their drawing board is a new ship that will soon be a major weapon in the War on Terror. It's known merely as LPD-21, and it is at least 5 years away from completion. LPD-21 is one of 9 in a new class of amphibious ships known in the Navy as Gators.
Depth of water beneath the keel is 31 feet.
Packed full of the latest weapons and cutting-edge technology, these landing platform docks, or LPDs, main purpose is to deliver small expeditionary forces and special ops to foreign lands.
Come left, steer course 000. Come left, steer course 000.
Where they can infiltrate enemy strongholds with pinpoint precision. On August 28, 2002, as workers melt steel for the construction of the LPD line, Governor Pataki's request for special consideration is approved by the Secretary of the Navy. New Yorkers would get their fighting ship, as LPD-21 becomes the USS New York.
The day the towers fell, all Americans were all New Yorkers. The USS New York will ensure that all New Yorkers and the world will never forget the evil attacks of September 11th.
I was due to retire. However, I had learned that LPD-21 was going to become the New York. And I wanted to have the honor of working on this ship and make it my last ship. So I decided to stay on, defer retirement.
But the announcement takes place with an increased sense of urgency. With the U.S. already fighting in Afghanistan, America's new war on terror will soon send troops to Iraq. The expanding war places even more pressure on the need for a flexible and fast vessel like the LPD to deliver Marines where they are needed most. But with the challenges of design and construction that come with any new class of ship, the first in the line, LPD-17, USS San Antonio quickly falls behind schedule. The newly named LPD-21, USS New York, is still in blueprints and facing the same kinds of challenges. On September 9, 2003, almost 2 years to the day of the terrorist attack, 24 tons of World Trade Tower steel is melted down at this Amite, Louisiana foundry, to be cast into the prow of the USS New York.
The morning that we erected that unit, it was a pretty eventful day. It was a pretty emotional day.
The white area that you see on the leading edge of the ship is the bow stem where the World Trade Center steel is located. It's the piece of steel that cuts the water through the ship, leads the ship where it's going.
This ship looks different than any other ship that's ever been designed for a warship.
Borrowing stealth technology from F-117 and B-1 aircraft,
1905.
it can perform surgical strikes or rescue hostages virtually unnoticed.
There are no right angles on the ship topside. Now, a lot of the material topside is also designed to absorb radiated energy so it does not reflect back to the ship, and you can see that looking around the ship.
This is a stealthy ship. You might see this ship as a fishing boat on your radar, when in reality, of course, you're looking at something that's pretty dang large.
But it isn't just revolutionary in its looks. This is fourth-generation warfare, where the U.S. will fight insurgents and terrorists instead of other nations.
Counting officer, come right strict course 110.
Western Road, State Course 110.
Landing platforms are built to deliver smaller vessels and aircraft, and the New York is built around the two most innovative of these craft, the LCAC and the Osprey.
One of the neat things about this ship is it was built for the future, for the Marine, all their newer vehicles, but also built a lot of flexibility into this class of ship.
The San Antonio class ship was designed specifically for the movement of the V-22 Osprey aircraft that the Marine Corps is developing.
After a quarter-century of development and 30 fatalities during early flights, this controversial new weapon is ready for active deployment in Iraq, where supporters believe their ability to take off from an LPD like a helicopter and fly far inland like a plane is just the tool needed to wipe out pockets of insurgents and terrorists.
Obviously, the V-22 having the ability to go further inland, we can bypass the beach and take the fight further into the enemy and the shore.
The Ospreys give the LPD the functionality of a small aircraft carrier. But the LPD's ability to launch innovative seagoing vessels, such as LCACs, is what really sets the LPD apart.
Okay, what you're looking at here is the back end of the USS New York, and this is the stern gate. This stern gate will come down, and you'd have a clear shot looking at what's called the well deck. That well deck actually fills partially full of water.
Our well deck operates on the principle water is heavier than air. The ship is designed to have ballast tanks throughout the ship, and we fill those ballast tanks with water, which bring the draft of the ship down in the aft end of the ship. When it's time to bring the well deck back up to our normal steaming draft, we push that water out of those ballast tanks and put air back in there.
Before LCACs, the technology behind landing on foreign soil hadn't changed much since World War II. Vulnerable to landmines and artillery launch from the shore, many troops were taken out before ever hitting the battleground. But these new space-age LCACs are actually hovercraft, gliding above the waves at speeds nearly 5 times as fast as previous amphibious craft, making them harder to hit. They are capable of landing far into the shore and can carry 75 tons of equipment. Their ability to launch quickly gives military planners flexibility and the element of surprise against terrorists and insurgents. Off the Virginia coast, the New York sister ship, the newly commissioned USS San Antonio, is conducting sea trials that will test two of her key weapons, speed and nimbleness. Lessons learned here will no doubt contribute to the success of the USS New York. Still, two questions remain. Can her construction overcome the mounting delays before yet another deadly incident? And can she live up to the exalted history of the name USS New York? Named in honor of the 9/11 heroes, USS New York, LPD-21, is built with 24 tons of World Trade Tower steel and is the latest in a line of heroic ships christened New York. Amazingly, 90 years to the day before the attack on September 11, 2001, another USS New York was born. September 11, 1911, the keel of battleship USS New York, BB-34, is laid. The 27,000-ton battleship is first in her class. Like her 21st century namesake, even her design is revolutionary. Mirroring the design of the British battleship Dreadnought, the New York is remarkable in her power, speed, and protection. Her main gun battery of monster 14-inch guns are the first in the U.S. Navy.
Just visualize a 14-inch projectile and how big those things are. We could fire about 8 miles, which was just about the distance of the horizon.
The battleship USS New York's first test will ironically come in the form of early terrorism in Veracruz, Mexico.
At the time of the occupation of Veracruz, we had to deal with Pancho Villa and the terrorists and criminals that were infiltrating into the United States. And you saw the impact that a ship like the battleship New York can have on a nation state, as well as a group of criminals that really bring us to today's warships, which are able to fight in much the same areas.
As the New York sails back from the successful show of force in Mexico, war is already brewing across the Atlantic. And it is only a matter of time until Woodrow Wilson will send the Navy's big guns to aid the Allies. When America enters the war in 1917, the New York, along with several other battleships, is sent to aid England as part of the Grand Fleet. By blocking the Germans in port, the Grand Fleet keeps the Germans out of many major operations and has a tremendous impact on the war. But it will be by air, not sea, that the balance in warfare is changed. Aviation is quickly proving itself as a tremendous weapon in the war. The New York, like most battleships, is intended for attacking other naval vessels and land targets, not airborne targets overhead. Her survival now depends on adapting to this new threat. The battleship New York is brought in for a complete retrofitting that takes nearly a year, but makes her state-of-the-art with 70 new anti-aircraft guns. But as World War I comes to an end, It will be almost 2 decades before her guns are again fired in defense of the nation. (1941) brings America into yet another world conflict. By this time, Battleship 34 is 30 years old. Sailors take to calling her the Old Lady of the Seas.
She was built before World War I. Of course, she was an antique, really.
The maximum speed on the New York was something like 18 knots. That's not very fast.
We couldn't keep up with the new ones. The new ones were 35 knots.
Despite her age, in November 1942, the Old Lady finds herself back in full battle for the first time in decades. With so many green troops who had never seen battle before, the Old Lady and her fierce 14-inch guns provide a sense of confidence.
The first invasion of New York was at Safi Harbor in Africa in 1942.
We were strictly for bombarding. That was our role, to bombard the island or wherever we were sent to do. We were not engaging other ships or anything like that.
There was a French ship that the Germans had taken over, or the French, Vichy French, and they started to open fire on the New York.
Suddenly, a shell hits the New York just below her 5-inch guns, laying the crew out flat. Damage control parties scramble to assess the destruction, fearing the worst. Miraculously, they discover it has missed all major systems and damage is light. The USS New York remains unscathed. The New York fires 76,000 pounds of explosives at Safi. One well-placed round takes out the harbor's main battery and kills its commander. Safi Harbor is taken. With victory in North Africa, the old veteran of 2 world wars is removed from the fight. She returns to the U.S. to assist in the training of some 12,000 sailors in gunnery and targeting. But her retirement will be short-lived.
We had hoped we would go to the Pacific. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden they're taking all the blackboards and all the other training things that we had aboard the ship for our classes, and they started taking all this stuff and putting it over on the dock. And the word got around that we were going to get ready and we were going to go to the Pacific.
The battleship New York enters the war in the Pacific as a relic, but still lethal with her 14-inch guns. But her namesake, under construction some 60-plus years later, enters the global war on terror with weapons the crew of the battleship would consider pure science fiction. But they do share a few similar dangers that time and technology has only made more proficient. Mines and rockets launched from shore.
Right here we have the Slick 32 system. It aids in the ship's self-defense system.
As demonstrated on the now complete USS San Antonio, these systems provide threat warnings to help locate, identify, or even decoy an incoming attack. If an active defense is required, the RIM 116 system takes over, launching weapons that actually intercept incoming missiles. But even with these precautions, the new ship can still be vulnerable. The suicide boat attack on the USS Cole during a refueling stop in Yemen killed or injured more than 50 sailors and left a 40 by 40 foot hole in the port side of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. A clear reminder that high-tech weaponry doesn't equal invincibility, and modern ships must be prepared for close-in attacks.
Our Mark 46 gun system we have on board here was taken from the gun systems that are on the advanced amphibious vehicles that the Marines use. It's an unmanned, remote-fired gun system which provides excellent close-in defense from small boat attacks.
That one contact from earlier, that was at 335, it's now at 329.
We are in CIC, which is the brains of the ship. From CIC, we control helos. We keep radar on all contacts. We communicate with the bridge and give course recommendations to navigate the ship safely.
The sophisticated technology incorporated in this new class of ship will one day save lives. But as designers and engineers scramble to complete construction of LPD-21, it will be the elements and not high-tech equipment that prove the hardest to overcome.
For Delta Charlie 105.
Your safety navigation is 347, 850 yards up to starboard bow.
Right ship course 0049. Submarine right 5 degrees, couple course 004.
This is the future of the U.S. Navy. Amphibious ships that can launch high-tech craft into enemy territory at astonishing speeds. But this has not always been the case for amphibious warfare. And the consequences of assaulting a beach by water have long been deadly. During D-Day, amphibious ships transport thousands of soldiers to the Normandy beachheads, while battleships like the USS New York's sister ship, the USS Texas, cover them with valor. But in June of 1944, the battleship New York is nowhere near the beaches of northern France.
At that time, we were sailing down through the Caribbean and going down to Trinidad. We wanted to get into it. And so when finally we were told we were going to go to the Pacific, we were very, very happy about it.
The New York's history is about to change, as the Pacific campaign promises to bring some of her most intense fighting yet. Her first engagement is an ominous one. Iwo Jima is a tiny, barren, sulfurous island located 650 miles from Tokyo. The coming battle will consume 25,851 American casualties over 36 days of horrific fighting. As the New York approaches the island, her first contact with the enemy will be a sign of things to come. Prowling beneath the New York are Japanese submarines.
So we were with a couple of other ships, and sure enough, all of a sudden our ship starts going boom, 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 like this. And you could feel it all through the ship.
The unfamiliar sound is something shearing the blades off her portside propeller. Word spreads through the ship. They've been hit by a Japanese torpedo.
And so we thought, oh crap, here we go back to the Navy Yard in Pearl Harbor to get a new screw.
Within reach of the island, and loaded with thousands of 5- and 14-inch shells, the New York is too critical to the campaign to turn back. Propeller or not, the invasion is going forward, and so is the New York.
So a couple ships came with us, and we went into Iwo Jima going at about 6 knots. And so we fired every shell we had in the 3 days prior to the invasion.
We shelled the island, softening it up before the Marines made a landing. And you went in the turret normally about 4:30 in the morning and came out about 11 o'clock at night. And you fired all day long. What you feel on the turret is concussion, like somebody's giving you a bear hug. And I sat right underneath it, and it just sounds like thunder.
Never saw any population on there at all. I understand there was 20,000 troops here, but they were all underground.
And they sent us in actually as a target because the Japanese weren't firing back. And so when they don't fire back, we don't know where they are. And we'd go in as close as we dared go in without running aground.
For 3 days, the New York pummels the coast, throwing almost 1.5 million pounds of ammunition at the island. Until finally limping back to port to be fitted with a new propeller. Patched up, and with bloody Iwo Jima behind her, she heads out to sea once again. Only this time, she steams even farther into enemy territory. Near Okinawa, Battleship 34 takes her place in the vast armada.
There was a huge mass of ships assembled there. Probably 2-3 weeks before the actual invasion started. Just going up down the coast, bombarding selected targets.
You figure 8 battleships and 10 guns, that's 80 rounds of 2,300 pound ammunition going over to that island. Anything within 100 yards, it would kill you whether you were hit or not. The concussion was just too much. We fired every day, all day. We would just cruise up Okinawa and broadside and then turn around and load and come down, and everybody, it just fired all day long.
The New York's 14-inch guns pound the coastline, delivering deadly blows. But a new, terrifying Japanese innovation is quickly filling the skies above them.
You were no more than in your sack and general quarters would sound because the kamikazes were coming.
In the time we were at Okinawa, we spent the equivalent of 3 weeks, 21 days, 24 hours a day, at air alert.
I heard this plane coming in real close, and so I'm fascinated. And I watched it. It didn't go 40 feet from me, and it came right past. And the fuselage went right through and splashed on the other side of the water. But both wings hit something on the ship, and both of his wings were torn off, and he went through and crashed. If he had been 6 feet to the left or 6 feet to the right, his fuselage would have hit, and that's when the fuselage hits. They usually had a bomb aboard to explode, and they usually had enough fuel, and they would have a big fire. So we were that lucky.
Nobody was killed. We had maybe 20 or 30 guys that were pretty well injured.
Unfortunately, as I heard, there were over 5,000 Navy sailors killed at Okinawa from kamikaze attacks.
We stayed there and we bombarded for something like 78 days. And at the end of that, why, we had worn out the linings on the main batteries.
Then we went back to Pearl, and they were re-gunning us. They were putting new guns on us to go to the invasion of Japan.
The crew of the New York got what they asked for, fighting on a scale unknown in human history. And now they are preparing for the most feared invasion yet, the home island of Japan. After unleashing over 4,000 rounds of ordnance during the battle for Okinawa, the USS New York's armaments are in desperate need of overhauling. As she is re-gunned at Pearl Harbor, the sailors are told to prepare for the invasion of the Japanese home island, a prospect guaranteed to make the bloody battles they have already been through seem minor. But as the departure date draws near, one event changes everything.
I've heard some people talk about how many would have been lost had we went into Japan and whatnot, and those numbers were pretty big. So I was glad that it was over.
With the war over, the battleship New York makes a triumphant return to her home city.
There was a lot of celebration. There was other ships there, and the horns were going off, and the water cannons were spraying.
If it was peacetime, the New York was always in the city of New York because they called it the Christmas ship. And at Christmas Day, they would invite so many of the orphans in New York to come on board ship to have a Christmas party. Then the crew chipped in, I forget what it was, $5 or $10 a piece. Went and buy gifts for all the kids. And everyone got a gift. It was really fun.
Today, the USS New York, LPD-21, inherits this spirit. But in a twist of fate, it will be the people building this ultra-modern vessel who will be the ones in need of humanitarian aid. By the end of August 2005, construction on the USS New York has been underway for 2 years. The vessel is scheduled to be launched the following year and delivered in 2007. But those plans do not account for what is brewing off the coast. A hurricane named Katrina. At the Northrop Grumman Avondale shipyard, workers brace for the approaching storm. 84 employee storm watchers stay on site, not knowing how the hurricane will affect their families or their homes. Already behind schedule, any damage to support equipment, vehicles, or to the New York herself will be a huge setback. The ships already pierside are towed into open water, away from the dock, so they won't damage themselves in the expected swells. But the New York remains in dry dock, unable to move. The same takes place at other nearby shipyards run by Northrop Grumman, where the New York sister ships are under construction. Now, all they can do is wait. As the Gulf comes under attack, storm watchers at both shipyards risk their lives as 175-mile-per-hour winds pound the shoreline and send massive equipment flying. At Avondale's sister shipyard in Pascagoula, 200 storm watchers valiantly fight 20-foot storm surges. When the winds die down, most fear the worst. Amazingly, the damage at Avondale is relatively light. The New York has withstood the storm without any major damage. But the story at Pascagoula is very different. Buildings, trucks, and all kinds of support equipment are destroyed. It will take months to return to capacity. Together, the shipyards suffer $850 million of damage. Still, New Orleans seems relatively unscathed until the levees break. The water level rises at an alarming rate, consuming homes and sending people fleeing. Most of the 7,000 workers employed by Avondale have their homes in the flood zone. The New York, born out of the ashes of 9/11, falls victim to a whole new kind of tragedy, forging an undeniable link between two of the greatest national catastrophes of the 21st century. Many of Avondale's employees are evacuated to towns and cities all over the country as the shipyard and the city struggle to get back on track. With Pascagoula in shambles, Avondale, in addition to repairing their own yard, now has to take on a good chunk of their sister shipyard's work, sending schedules back even further. The question is, without a place to live, how can the employees continue to work and rebuild their lives? The solution is Camp Katrina, a dormitory where those who lost everything in the storm can live during the work week. Nearly 2 years after the disaster, it is still in operation.
I lost my home, and hopefully I can get a home rebuilt, but I'll never forget Camp Katrina.
I evacuated to New York. I was up there with my fiance and her mother, and they showed me a home, so this is like my gift to them through my work.
Out of the 7,000 workers at Avondale, only 5,000 return. The New York sets a new deadline for delivery, 2008, a full year later than originally planned.
And the fact that we're working on a ship called the New York, which is built from steel from the towers itself, they are two separate tragedies, but they both are monumental as far as how it affects people.
Despite her setbacks, the New York is already building a reputation for surviving epic events, just like her predecessor, the battleship New York. But for this World War II hero ship, one final extraordinary event will send her to the bottom of the sea. Crowds gather along Pier 64 in New York Harbor as the USS New York, Battleship 34, steams away for her final mission. It will be the last time the citizens of New York will ever see their beloved Christmas ship. Little do they know of the date she is about to have with destiny. While the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki proved the incredible power unleashed by an atomic bomb on land, little is known of its destructive capabilities on a fleet at sea. In order to study the effects of nuclear weapons on ships, the Navy authorizes Operation Crossroads, a nuclear test that will consist of 2 detonations, each with a yield of over 20 kilotons. Their target will be a fleet of more than 90 vessels assembled in the Bikini Lagoon in the Pacific. The USS New York is slated to be among them.
We knew it was going to go to Bikini when we were still on board ship. They printed out a sheet and gave it to us, told us we were going to Bikini. We knew the ship was going to be one of the targets.
On July 1st, 1946, with the target ships positioned just 1,600 yards from the blast, the first bomb, named Able, detonates. The support fleet, sitting 10 nautical miles to the east, returns to the target area to find the old lady of the seas still afloat. Incredibly, she has survived an airburst explosion of over 20 kilotons. On July 25th, the second bomb, Baker, is set 90 feet below the waterline. The resulting explosion proves devastating.
The other ones were all blown to pieces, but the New York went through 2 atomic bomb tests, and she didn't go down. But then she was so radioactive, they couldn't do anything with it.
The Navy tries everything, from multiple foam washes to painstakingly scrubbing the ship with a combination of sand and lye. But nothing will reduce the radiation enough to make the New York habitable. By August 10th, the decision is made to stop work and tow the surviving fleet to Kwajalein.
That they took it out to Kwajalein, which is one of the islands in the Pacific, and they had it set up as a target, and the Navy was going to practice with some of their new rockets or what have you. And the ship. They just started bombing it.
For 8 hours, the USS New York, BB-34, stays afloat under constant bombardment before finally slipping beneath the waves.
They called her the old lady. They called her a queen. They called her the Christmas ship. But she was one tough ship. She really was. I mean, boy, she was built to stay.
While many veterans can visit their former homes since they've been converted to museums, the veterans of the New York will have to be content with retelling her amazing contributions.
She did more than hold her own. She did as much as any ship could have done, especially at Okinawa. She wasn't a slouch.
We didn't even know how much we loved the ship until we got off it.
It's closeness. You have pride in your ship and pride in yourselves, and you really make some fine friends that you never forget. Yeah, you never forget them.
The USS New York, Battleship 34, steamed 123,867 miles during her 414 days underway in the war. She earned her reputation through hard-fought battles and in the end gave the ultimate sacrifice for her country. She will rest at the bottom of the Pacific for some 60-plus years before her namesake, under construction in Louisiana, places a USS New York at the forefront of America's defense once again. 3 years into production, she is rushing toward a major milestone, and the clock is ticking.
Right now, we're at a critical phase at trying to get the ship ready for launch. We've got 52 different systems among the ship. Basically, we got over 60 miles of piping that we got installed.
As workers race to meet the new deadline, preparations are in place for what can only be described as an incredible event, moving the 25,000-ton New York from one end of the shipyard to the other, where she will prepare to launch.
Okay, what you're looking at here is skids. We translate from one position to another by placing these skids that cross the roadway between the two sets of skids from one position to another, and we put grease on top of them. We push them over with some hydraulic powered jacks, and it can take this ship that's 684 feet long and push it over in an 8-hour time period, 220 feet.
When the ship moves to the dry dock, on that day, when these ships translate, they are the largest moving objects on a planet. They're talking 25,000 tons moving over the land.
Poised in a position to launch, the name USS New York will soon grace the seas once again. And when that time comes, the surviving veterans of the old Lady of the Seas will be there.
Our shipmates who we still know who are alive, we will all be invited to attend those, like the christening and the commission.
We often talk at our reunions, what happens to our reunion group after we're gone? Maybe we can pass it on to the new ship, and maybe they'll start their reunions the same as we did.
The motto for New York is never forget. I think what that says to anyone who is willing to test our resolve is that we will never forget and that we will never retreat from what's right and from our place in the world.
We're building a ship that's going to be one of the best in the world. It's going to be the state of the art in technology. As this ship sails around the world, we will always remember New York, and we hope that it would help bring peace to the world and to the United States.